Mark, welcome to Art and Cocktails. I'm so excited to have you on the show. It's been such a pleasure having you in our issue 42. And I'm really excited to share your story with our listeners. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. So, before we dive into your amazing work and the incredible tutorials and lessons you're sharing with other artists, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? How did you get started? When did you know that you wanted to become an artist?
Yeah. So my name is Mark Liam Smith. I'm a full-time artist and content creator. I was originally born in England, but I grew up in Saskatchewan, Canada. For your American listeners, that's the Canadian province just north of North Dakota and Montana. So in the cold West. I currently live in Toronto, and how I got started with art, I guess it must have been my mother would say I've always drawn, but I would probably trace my origins back to when I was about 10 or 11 years old, and with my fascination with comics and in particular the X-Men. I really resonated with those characters, and I would save my allowance and buy a single book. And um, my love of the comic turned into, after you read a comic two or three or eight or 10 times and you have to wait another month. Remember, I'm Gen X, so this is pre-internet times. um
I
you
remember
have to
those
wait a
days too.
yeah, you have to wait a whole month till the next issue. You have to do more than just read, so reading turned to tracing, and tracing turned to drawing, and I guess I've sort of made art ever since.
That's so cool. I love that. I used to do similar things too. And I grew up in Russia and we had this like artist magazine that was like with activities and things like that. And we too, like we had to wait and it was like super rare and it was a whole thing. So it's so interesting how print media can really influence us and give us some helpful tools. Now, from that point, your work now, especially like looking at your beautiful paintings behind you and the ones we published in the issue, it has transformed to extreme realism and is so beautiful and so detailed. Was that something you were always interested in, rendering reality or capturing objects with such accuracy, or is that something that came later on?
I suppose there's always been an element of realism. I actually produce art in a variety of styles. I think the underlying thing that connects all of my art is that I'm interested in narrative and storytelling, and in particular these paintings behind me and this body of work that I've been working on for the last 4 years have a very strong narrative aspect. So they are sort of recontextualized versions of 17th century Dutch paintings. And that was, for me, the height of storytelling in art. Everything at this level was symbolic. So there's another aspect to this kind of art as well that I'm quite attracted to, and that is the multi-layered art. So you can appreciate, or one hopes anyway, that the audience could appreciate the art on the level simply of there's a nice still life, or there's a nice design, or something aesthetically pleasing. But then when you introduce that symbolic or narrative aspect, you can sort of dive deeper and peel back the layers, so to speak. Uh, Not literally, of course, you shouldn't touch paintings.
We don't want that. Please don't do that.
but uh, but it's that narrative aspect, and then I guess I would say that that narrative aspect for me goes back to, I haven't always been an artist. Before doing art, I studied linguistics quite extensively, and art, in my view anyway, is a language, and perhaps one of the oldest languages. There's, I suppose, some evidence that um, people were making art even before we were people, Homo sapiens. I mean, so pre
Mhm.
Homo sapiens, we were making art. It's really it's deep within us to create. Um, so
I love that.
I can sort of get into that aspect. I don't know.
Yeah, no, we can definitely jump in. And For those, and I really love what you said about, and that was my favorite part of art history, like the symbolism and all the deeper meanings in the, like you said, it looks like a beautiful image and you can just appreciate that part, but then going deeper, do you have any insights or tips for people who might want to start looking at art for through that lens and to start noticing more, hidden messages and symbols rather
Yeah,
than just looking at the representation? I think for a lot of our listeners, they're already doing that. A lot of us are
right.
artists, but for those who might be new to that way of thinking.
Yeah. So I suppose it would be about asking different kinds of questions. So for me, I like to, when I approach a piece of art and I don't know anything about the artist, and I've never seen that art before, I have a framework that I use, and I divide the art into form and content. And then within those two categories, I start asking particular kinds of questions. So I always start with what questions, and and those look different for the form and for the content. I can touch on both of those very briefly here. So a what question about the form would be what what is this thing? Is it a painting? What colors are used? What shapes are there? We're asking questions about the composition. So these sort of fundamental aspects of art, like line and edge and balance and symmetry. How was this thing made? And then the content. What is it? So it might be a still life. It might be a person. It might be abstract. So it just it's the colors of it. Once you ask all of the what questions you need to ask, that's sort of the first layer. Then I would say we get into the more interesting questions, and those are the why questions. And that's where I think you pick up on that narrative aspect, the storytelling aspect, or the lingual, the language aspect. So why is there a skull beside a flower? So it's not just about the what, there's a skull and there's a flower. When we ask why did that artist choose to put a skull and a flower together? Of course, we always have to assume that the artist is doing making these compositions intentionally. That is a big assumption sometimes. But if we assume the artist has a certain threshold of intentionality, and we ask these why questions, why is there a skull beside a flower? We might come up with something like, well, maybe the flower symbolizes the skull or is a metaphor for the skull. Maybe the skull itself is a metaphor. And then now we have that answer. Let's ask another why question and just keep going down deeper. So, and then, you might arrive at this idea that, hey, these things aren't just flowers. This isn't just a pretty picture. The flowers symbolize us, humanity, and the flower has a life cycle that we can easily see. That it blooms, or sorry, it starts as a bud, and then it would bloom, and then it would wilt. So, in that way, and the 17th century master certainly did think about it that way. It symbolizes our own mortality.
Mm.
And I do talk about that a lot in my work about how we should really take advantage of the time that we have.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. I really want people to just even for myself, because I think so much of our life now is like easy scrolling and so much content. And I really want us all to be more thoughtful. And part of this is it's funny that, well, it's very timely that you're on the show because the past week we've just had some like crazy reactions on social media and people online just like really harshly criticizing certain things without really any explanation. And I really want all of us, whether we like something or not, to just be more thoughtful in the way that we perceive things, asking those important questions and trying to understand each other. Like you said, art is a language, and we might not speak the same sub languages like within the visual field, but I think it's so important that we get more curious and less, just dismissive or just, consuming things without thought. So I really love that approach. Thank you for sharing that framework. And
Yeah.
in terms for your own work and your own compositions, how do you get inspired and what makes you, want to create a painting or a photograph? I know you have many different bodies of work as well.
Yeah, I'll answer that question by picking up on what you just said about easy scrolling. So we do live in a consumer society, and we are consumers. And so I'm inspired to create in order to contribute to the great conversation. So because I do believe art is a language, there are two aspects of that language. There's the creation aspect, and that's the person producing. In this right now, it's words, but it could be anything. It could be poetry or music or dance or a two-dimensional, three-dimensional art. So there's the creation aspect, and then there's the consumption aspect, and that would be the person listening in one case, or scrolling or watching videos or seeing art. So uh, those two are intertwined: creation and consumption. The creator uh, generates that piece of art, and that's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in contributing to that great conversation. The consumer then takes that contribution, that whether it's a soundbite or a painting, and breaks it down. That you could say that's analysis, right? Breaking down, and then they would place their own filter, a cultural filter or an experiential filter, just and then resynthesize it. So there's an analysis, which is the consumption, and then a synthesis, which is the creation. And then when they've synthesized that piece of language, they then have an opportunity to generate their own piece of their conversation. So we're all in a strange sort of way. The I'm going to paraphrase poorly here, but the universe pondering itself. We're each a little part of the universe, having a conversation. So what inspires me? Well, in short, it's just the opportunity to lend my voice to the things I've consumed and resynthesized, analyzed and resynthesized. And so it's I suppose that's how I
Yeah,
would
no,
put
I
it.
love
Yeah.
that. Yeah, it's very deep. I've been thinking about that all day now. My mind went into like outer space and seeing us as little dots. Like, I don't know if you ever seen that meme where the earth just like zoomed out forever.
Yeah, yeah.
That's the visual that I'm getting, but that's super
The little
powerful.
blue dot.
And it's so powerful. And that leads me to the next question is you are someone, you obviously create incredible art, but you're also passionate about passing on your techniques and skills that you've picked up along the way. Can you talk about how that got started? What motivated you to start sharing amazing drawing tutorials and painting tutorials?
Right. Well, I've always enjoyed teaching. I've taught in different capacities. I did the obligatory post-university ESL overseas, and as after I studied linguistics, I did some teaching there. So there's always a part of me that does enjoy teaching and sharing my perspectives. But really, the online, the content creation started, I would say, as as the art world itself changed with social media coming into play. Uh, the galleries were no longer the sole the sole entities responsible for marketing. Artists themselves also had a responsibility to market their own art. And looking at the kinds of opportunities that artists used to market themselves. Because of perhaps my nature, I'm more introverted. I chose to be a painter because I I'm in my little studio working away. I'm not as bombastic and charismatic as perhaps I see a lot of people on social media, and wasn't quite as comfortable just showing, hey, look what I made. View me, view me. Uh, so instead of doing that, I began doing sort of work in progress shots that turned into, hey, let me talk about what I'm doing. And then I had a show coming up in 2000, and it was a solo show in 2021. And I decided to try painting live. So I just propped up a camera and painted the show. This large painting behind me, I painted live on TikTok, and it over about 4 months. And that's really where I got very interested in social media, and I've uploaded the entire painting to my YouTube channel. By the way, if anyone wants to watch a
Yeah,
painting there,
absolutely.
be made very, very slowly. Um, yeah, it sort of went into from whips, work in progress shots, into painting my own things online and talking about my process. And then have gradually switched from painting to drawing with my online tutorials, and that's more an accessibility issue. And it just came out of a very casual and simple conversation I had with my wife, who just sort of offhandedly was talking about not being able to draw. And as we dug into that conversation, I realized that she, at some point in her youth, somebody told her she couldn't draw, or maybe she told herself, but she created this cage. And the conversation was about, no, I believe anyone can learn to draw. It's not a magical gift. It's something that maybe people are better at without any instruction, maybe like singing. But it is something that anyone can learn to do. Anyone can learn to be creative. Anyone can learn to draw. And that was the genesis of the idea. And so from there, all of my social media sort of turned to proving that point, really, and saying, hey, if you are an absolute beginner, maybe you're somebody who love to draw. And I honestly believe that every 5-year-old, if you put a box of pencil crayons in front of any 5-year-old's hand, they will pick it up and start drawing. People love to draw. Everyone loves to draw at 5 years old. But by about 15, you have these groups where some people can't, have told themselves they can't draw. And then it's self-fulfilling prophecy from that point. If you don't think you can draw, you won't draw. So then you don't draw and you can't. And so, yeah, the social media is really just about letting people know that at any age, you can not only learn to draw, but learn to create, learn to express yourself. And yeah, that's really, I think, the focus of all of the how to draw
Yeah, I love
videos and
that.
tutorials.
Thank you for sharing that with the world. I think it's so powerful. And there's so many, like so many people that I talk with, like even at our gym, they're like, we can't draw a stick figure. It's such a common thing to say.
Right.
And I don't know at what point do people decide that for themselves or someone else decides for them. But it is really, really hard. Do you have any tips for those who may be looking to reconnect with their drawing practice, or maybe they deep down, because I know I'm an expressive painter, but sometimes I'll dabble and like try to sit and render a more realistic drawing because I feel like it's just really satisfying. But those voices come in, you're not good at that, blah, blah, blah. You're not patient
Right.
enough, blah, blah, blah. Do you have any tips for helping someone who wants to get back to drawing or creating in general to silence those voices, and how to kind of move through and just get back to the basics, even putting like pencil to paper?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think the biggest tip, and I've said this many times on lives, uh, is buy yourself a sketchbook, or use printer paper, whatever it is, get a pencil, or paint, whatever it is that you feel like, yeah, you want to use to express yourself, and just explore the tools. But most importantly, don't tell anyone, don't show anyone. As soon as you start drawing in order to seek somebody else's approval, you're going to be limiting your own expression and your own creativity. So, especially when you're just learning, drawing is a technical skill, and there are fundamentals to drawing. You have to learn proportion and perspective and anatomy, and all of these things can be really intimidating if you fear somebody else's judgment. So what I would say is get a sketchbook and draw quietly. Just like you may have a personal journal or a diary. You don't write in that diary and then show it to the world and then have everybody grammar check you. In the same way, let your sketchbook be a personal thing, and just experiment with your tools. Most people, for example, most people, sorry, don't know that this implement, this drawing device, commonly known as the pencil, uh, has two different tools in the end here. There's the tip that can be used for thin lines and details, but then there's the side of the pencil that we might use for broader lines and for shading. So just holding the pencil, like this for the tip, and then being able just to kind of flip it around your thumb and have it closer to the paper for shading. That's something that you can experiment with and get to know how to use your medium. And the same thing goes with painting and experimenting with how colors mix together, with color theory. One of my um, um, things that I try to express on social media is that because I am colorblind, I've really had to dive into color theory and learn how to mix without necessarily the benefit of having using my eyes as relying on my eyes for intuition. So yeah, do it privately is what I would say. Don't show people until you're comfortable enough to to receive feedback.
I love that. That's such a great advice. And I think even for, I've been doing this for over 10 years now, but there's still a need for privacy, for experimentation, for play. And I have learned this recently because as you grow, you get more and more opportunities. And I just really learned this year, like in my body, how important it is for me to have spaces without deadlines, without always producing for an outcome. And I think it's so important. How do you balance that part of being an artist with, shows and sales and opportunities versus like really nurturing your own vision and spending time with your work?
The balance is difficult. That's a great question, and it's something that I don't know that I've figured out. One thing that I've always maintained with my painting practice, my public painting practice, my gallery facing practice, is that it was very important for me to work with gallerists who believed in what I was doing, that building that gallery relationship. So I've certainly changed my style over the years. And my when I first started, I was very realistic with not really trying to demonstrate technical aspects. And I think a lot of that was personal, trying to say, hey, I can paint realistic colors even though I'm colorblind. It was laborious taking photos and mapping the exact colors, and I think I was trying to prove something to myself more. But then as I transitioned into I had sort of a portrait phase, and then I've settled now on these still lives. But the way I make marks and the way I express color has changed and developed. I think as I have, and more importantly, I've become more comfortable with being colorblind and saying, hey, I'm going to paint the way I feel like I want to paint and how I want to express myself. So yeah, how do you balance it? It's having a good relationship with a gallerist. If you are in the art world, obviously it's very important to stress that being an artist does not mean that you have to have a gallery. You don't even have to put your art on social media. You don't have to sell art to be an artist. You have to
Mm-hmm.
make art to be an artist. And the art world is just a very small part of art. But if you are interested in being an artist in the art world, then you do have a more constrained practice, I would say, and that's because the the gallerist it's the gallerist would needs to have a reasonable expectation that you, if you're calling yourself a sculptor and then your next show is a bunch of songs, um, the gallerist would have a hard time placing you with certain collectors. So it is much more constrained if you're going to go the route of being an artist in the art world. But it's loosening up. That constraint is loosening again with
Yeah.
social media. There are many
It,
opportunities to make a living as an artist.
Yeah, thank you. So that's a great segue into my next question too. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I agree. I think it's like anything, having good relationships with people who believe in you, but also giving yourself that break and space to play and do something privately, like you said. Now, if you don't mind, I always love to ask our guests on the podcast about, ways that artists or creatives can support themselves, whether it is working with galleries or not. A lot of our listeners don't yet have galleries, or maybe they just want to be independent. Like Ashley Longshore is one of our heroes because she does her own thing. And there's so many different ways to support yourself, whether it doesn't even have to be related to art, like you said. But if there's any tools or tips that have helped you, whether it was growing your social media or certain strategies to take the pressure off and do what you love, if you could share some, that would be amazing.
Yeah, tools and tips to support yourself and your art career. Uh, well, if you can manage a non-art related job while you make art, that's certainly an amazing, stable opportunity. I think one of the biggest fears we have as artists is that financial instability. Uh, One of the biggest things for me was not limiting the proceeds of my art to the gallery environment. So when you sell, especially paintings, they're quite expensive. Uh, and if somebody has $800 or $900, they can buy an iPhone, or they can buy a small painting. So art has an amazing place in society, but it's not practical. It's the job of art is not to be practical. It's to inspire and uplift and to join that great conversation. But limiting yourself to only the sale of painting and only through galleries can be quite limiting. And there would be a reasonable amount of financial insecurity, I think, if that was the route you took. So I would recommend making prints. There are many services that you can do prints, and that doesn't have to be really an expensive thing. You can do, instead of prints. So I just want to draw the distinction between very high-end posters and prints. So printmaking itself, like lithography and intaglio and screen printing, is an art form. But what a lot of people call prints are actually just expensive posters that are printed, and they can be printed on very nice archival paper and so on. But as artists, you can get print on demand uh, services, so you don't have to have a big inventory, and you can sell prints. Those can be quite inexpensive. A lot of people, especially if you do have a social media presence, a lot of people may like your art and may want to follow your art, but spending $1,000 or $10,000 on a painting is just not practical. Whereas $50 or $100 would be, and that would be something not only that somebody could do to support you and your journey, but also it's within their budget. So yes, prints would be good. If you are comfortable making social media content, I would certainly recommend that. At a certain point, you can be paid for your views. Some platforms, I think Facebook and YouTube has that. TikTok does, not in Canada though.
Oh.
But yes, sadly. But yeah, you can be paid for your views. But even if you're not at a point with your following that you're being paid for views, you can certainly um, uh, join a platform that allows for subscriptions, like Instagram, and Patreon is another good one. There are a bunch of them actually, and that's a very easy way where people can join your journey, supporting you in your journey for, well, you set the price.
Mm.
I have my YouTube membership, for example, is 99 cents at the lowest tier. Um, so for extra drawing videos. So 99 cents isn't a lot of money, but that can add up if you have a whole bunch of people paying 99
Yeah.
cents. So that's something. But in the meantime, you have your quote unquote regular job that you could do. Yeah, it is difficult though. I would say that financial insecurity is probably the biggest challenge that artists have to face.
Yeah, it really is. And it kills your creativity too when your nervous system is worried about paying your electric. It's kind of hard to get inspired. So I just love sharing. And thank you so much for sharing your insights. I always ask our guests because I too, I preach all the time to my community, like, do not put pressure on us because that's what I did at the beginning. In art school, you just hear that's what success looks like, that's what the
Mm,
goal is. And then you actually experience it and you put all your eggs in one basket and then you like, can't function and like there has to be a better way. So I just love to see how different creators are supporting themselves and exchanging ideas because we all have different strengths they can work in. And speaking of that, would you also mind? Thank you so much for your generous insights, by the way. I really appreciate it. And our listeners do too. When it comes to growing your social media, have there been specific types of content that helped you personally? Because, we hear all the time, like, oh, I wish I joined it like 10 years ago, back when it was good, quote unquote. And I think I joined in 2014 and,
right.
maybe it was a good time, but I also feel like there's always challenges and we didn't know it was going to be used for promoting our art back in the day. I used to post like pictures of my food and cats.
Right.
But if you have any tips for current, what has been working for you that other people can try to implement?
Yeah, yeah. There's certainly uh, a lot of tips. This perhaps is a different podcast.
You maybe we'll
Um,
have you back.
no, no. Thank you for the invitation. I, I want to try to summarize this as succinctly as possible. I, like you, joined Instagram way back, maybe 2014, 2015. I was about 10,000 or 15,000 followers for most of that time. And in fact, it was last summer, I had about 20,000 followers on Instagram. So
Wow,
it's been,
that's a
yeah,
huge jump.
yeah,
And now
in
you're at
about a
what, 2
year.
million?
Yeah, yeah, about 2 million.
Congratulations. That's
Uh,
amazing.
for me, the major shift came when I stopped trying to show my work and I stopped trying to make my feed about me. And I started to give back. And so I made my feed about what can I do for you, not
I
what you can
love
do,
that.
what can you do for me. That was the big shift that I saw. So, and I'm still experimenting with it, but there's a blend of entertainment because we are consumers. So it can't be strictly educational. I would say entertainment, education, aspiration. So there's something uplifting about the content, but the whole package of that entertainment, education, and aspiration needs to have an emotional undercurrent. I think if you have that, you will be well on your way. Because with an emotional undercurrent, and in my case, I'm saying you can get that dream back, that dream where you liked drawing and people told you you couldn't draw, but now here's your opportunity to get back into it because you are a creative person, you know it, but you've built this cage and now you're scared to express yourself because you're fearful of judgment, or you don't think you're good enough and you don't think you can get better, but you can do it, and I'm here to let you know that you can do it. So there's an emotional undercurrent there that says, yeah, that that is something I can do. Yeah, that was the big change for me, making my social media not about me. And hey, look
Mm,
at my painting. Will you look at this? Hey, please look at this. Please comment on my stuff. That's I don't
that
think that's a
doesn't
winning. Uh, yeah,
Yeah, thank
and
you so much for sharing that. That's so powerful.
yeah,
I love that reframe. In fact, I'm rereading Donald Miller's Story Brand book again, and he talks about even from a sales perspective to make the customer or our audience in this case the hero and we're the guide. And I find that takes so much pressure off too, because you're not trying to save the world. You're just like, here is what I can help you with. Instead of like you said, trying to like perform and do all kinds of tricks. And it always leaves a bad taste in my mouth when I used to do that. And I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that.
my pleasure.
Oh my gosh. Well, I feel like we will have to have you back because now we have uncorked a whole other thing that I would absolutely love to dive deeper in. But Mark, thank you so much for sharing your journey and these powerful tips with our audience. What do you have going on next? How can we support you? And where can our listeners find you and your beautiful work?
Thank you. I'm Mark Liam Smith on all social media platforms. And what I have going on next, I have a book that is at the publishers now. My part is done, other than the promoting of it. It will be available in stores August 27th. It's called The New Artist's Guide to Drawing. It's designed for absolute beginners to beginners, ages 10 and plus. It'll be available, well, it's available for pre-order now in the States through Barnes& and Noble, Books A Million, Amazon. In Canada, it's available Indigo Chapters, Kohl's. And then mid-September, it'll be available in the UK at Blackwell's and Amazon, and then also Australia at Booktopia. So I teach my method of drawing that I use on social media in that book, and that is just identifying big shapes and then adding smaller shapes and contour lines and then details and shading. And yeah, I think it's a way in for people who have always been curious about drawing, who maybe have been reluctant for some reason, but want to make 2024 the year that they start their creative journey and start adding to that great conversation with the things that they know they have to say. And yeah, so that's August 27th. Pre-orders are available now, and that's probably the best way to support. Otherwise, I have probably my next show will be in the fall, and that's with Treat Gallery, New York Gallery, and I sell some digital paintings and photography through them.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for all your wisdom and for sharing such amazing insight for our audience. And I'm looking forward to reading your book. I'm going to link it for our listeners in the show notes and the blog post as well. So thank you so much, Mark. It's a pleasure having you.
Thank you so much, and it's great finally putting a face to the name. We'll have
Thank
to
you.
have real cocktails next time.
Yes. Thank you so much.